So let's see. Now I'm going to pretend to be Scott McCloud for a second. And I was starting to think more about the possibilities of comics, and kind of my own process figuring out what they could do. And I was really fascinated by the way different parts of the comic could interrelate in a nonlinear way. And so so I started thinking, I'm going to do this quickly, but I started thinking about comics compared to other media. And so film is like comics in a way. Sometimes we say comics are cinematic and they have cinematic angles. So one thing about movies is you've got every image replacing the one before it. And if you take a film reel off a projector, it looks kind of like a comic, but the way we experience movies is this replacement process. And time is linear and strictly dictated by this mechanism. Comics, well, you get all those moments that are kind of blown apart in any direction. And the other thing we get is the reader's expectation that the thing is going to be organized like prose. And I think when we talk about combining images and words, the key thing is not that we have literally images and words together on a page, but that the images are organized by the logic of prose. So you know that you start from the top left and you work through. And as a creator, I tried to kind of stretch the limits of this and try to figure out how much I really needed to honor that pattern for the sake of the reader. I knew the reader would come to the comic looking for that pattern. So if the reader knows it's a comic, he's going to start at the top left and go across and go down. So you can really, you don't have to have a strict panel structure that's as regular visually as prose, going across, going across, going across. You can kind of do anything. But you've got to manage the thing carefully because it can be confusing. But you know, you can deal with ambiguity, simultaneity, abstraction, and reader autonomy, letting the reader roam around. They're not on the kind of roller coaster of a film where you're always going forward. I asked Dale for more suffering, for more emotional content, more kind of over the top. And I remember when I read this, I thought it was kind of too dark, and I was really surprised that at this shooting scene. But I found myself, you know, getting into it. I started with this black background, and I didn't really know where I was going with it. I started from the top and worked down, like pushing from the top down. And later on, I would always plan the whole layout because I found that, you know, if you want to harmonize, it's really hard to just kind of make it up one thing after another. You need to look at the whole picture. But so in some ways, it's less cohesive than it may have been than it may have been if I did it a bit later on. But at the same time, not really knowing where I was going maybe allowed some of this experimentation. So they're kind of different logics working in different parts of the comic. I mean, there are no panels, no strict panel divisions. At the beginning, they're just sort of like I use edges, like the edge of my body there, or you know how the head kind of merges into Dale at the computer, but that sort of appears to be his shirt at the same time as the top of my head. Yeah. And I would just kind of make up things as I went, and then from the computer to the doorway where he's standing there, that's a different color because it wouldn't have been enough. If it had been line work, it would have been confusing there. So I just kind of was making stuff up as I went, and then the gun in the box, which becomes a pattern, which kind of merges into the cars. I don't know for any particular reason, except I was just trying to see how I could make things interrelate. And then later, the panels in a way get tighter. They're kind of closer together, and I use hard contrasts for the backgrounds. And you know, the bullet going through the girl, releasing the blood, becomes David in the next panel. And then he drops the gun, which is kind of pointed at his head in the panel below, which I was thinking, you know, these are the kind of things I think of as I go. I think, well, I feel really mad at myself if I shot my true love. So I just put the gun aimed at my head as a kind of expression of regret and self admonition. Now, structurally, what I tried to do, and this was, I mean, his script basically just described the scenario in a very, very concrete, linear way that Dale's hit on the head with a book. And I decided to try to do this meta thing where the whole comic was like a bookshelf. And so the books are falling out of the panels and hitting Dale on the head. So there's this kind of like, the past is coming back to hit him, you know, that he's setting off this, there's a series of a chain reaction almost, where he's dropping a book that hits him on the head and so forth. And the other thing that goes on is this book, ends up being like, your eye just connects those books, so you kind of see it as one book that's falling down across the whole comic that then is being put away onto the shelf. And when it's put away, it stops falling. Like, it doesn't fall again after this woman catches it. So the next time there's an empty panel, we see a leaf, a red leaf, instead of this book. And the leaf flutters down gracefully. And then that panel becomes long, and it's actually a tall building part of New York City. And then there are these leaves and the trees, which are kind of suggest this concussion, this like physical damage. I don't like the colors really, but I like that part of it. Because we have this duality here, there's the real Caroline, who's gone for some reason, and then Caroline's doppelganger. This was kind of one of my really conceptual layouts where I came from. I wanted to represent the theme in the entire layout, and it was something specific, duality and different sides of something. So the comic's divided in half. It's not quite half because I made some concessions so I could fit everything in, but I was going to divide it in half, and you have sort of the same thing on each side. You have a house shape with a peaked roof and a window in the same place, and so in that blue panel where they're embracing and he's looking towards us, he's looking across the window, kind of across the courtyard to the window on the other side. He's looking out the window. The window is the panel, and one side is the interior where we see what's going on, we see what people are feeling and talking about, and the other side is the stony exterior. So one character we have some insight into, and the other one is aloof and strange to us. And I don't know, the last panel is so much bigger than the other panels, so I wanted you to, when you get to that, to feel haunted by it, like it was looming over everything else. All the while we've been reading this stuff over here, this panel has just been there, silent, kind of observing everything, not having to show anything. And there were different interpretations. Some of the readers on the website, posted on the message board, had different ideas about whether that was Caroline in the window or Caroline's doppelganger, whether we were looking out of the room that we've been in, or we're now looking at Caroline's doppelganger from the other side. So does it confirm the existence of this girl in the other room, or does it not? It doesn't really tell us very clearly. The reason I showed this was because I like the guy hanging in the middle, and I thought that figure would be so prominent. I mean, if you were in the room with that figure, you wouldn't be able to ignore it. And I didn't have the space, or I didn't want to take the space to have, to try to work him into every shot, or to have some big shot of the room where, you kind of have to find different devices. So if it were a film, it would have been, maybe we'd have like, I don't know, you would have done it differently, but you couldn't have done this with the figure literally hanging in the middle of the comic. You don't need to necessarily show his placement in the room so carefully. You can just say he's right in the middle and represent that relative to the comic. So that's just one of those things. Yeah.
How long would it take from like concept to actually finished product for each one, on average?
It took longer and longer as time went on. I think the first one took like a couple hours, and then it became like a full week's work, like 40 hours or something. Something like this, the rendering, the detail takes a long time, but also planning it all out and figuring out how things are going to relate on the page, and when you get into that, it just becomes a more complicated process. You're more likely to have those hang-ups. Not every hour is as productive as every other hour, and also I find that I tend to think I'm almost done about halfway through, and then I realize that all the details actually take as much time as everything else, put together.
Yeah, I have a saying that comes from my background doing newspaper layout, which is that the little shit takes forever.